Hi everyone, welcome to NEWFORUM Transmedia Fashion Research Group panel. Our selected network of individuals from diverse artistic and technological fields will lead a conversation in our dynamic and collaborative space with valuable discussions on fashion, Web3 and technology, interdisciplinary art, media, philosophy, and more. Today's topic is digital curation and the creative value discovery, featuring Colborn, founder of MOCA, Fanny, founder of LAL Art, and Stina, an independent curator and art strategist researching art and blockchain. We're super honored to have these experts share their insights and perspectives with us today. Hey, welcome to this panel. We're quite honored to have you on.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So I've had the pleasure of interviewing each one of you, and that was a while ago. So before we dive into the topic of today, I would love to know what's up with you. What's been going on? What's new?
Fanny, you want it?
Sure. Since last year, 6 months in crypto is 5 years in real life. So in just to highlight the big things, moved my physical body to South America. Still advising artists and collectors want to get into or navigate Web3 and added consulting with museums with a fellowship that we're co-organizing with Diane Drube. So yeah, also what's up. I mean, if we want a full update on the market, that would take longer, I guess.
You can get deeper into that soon. So maybe Stina, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I have not moved myself physically. I'm still in Copenhagen. That hasn't changed. I've worked a lot with the Nordic scene. The Nordic scene is still very early. There's a lot that is happening now that happened several years ago in Berlin, where I was based before. So I've been thinking a lot about and working a lot with how can I take the learnings from the Berlin scene and apply that to the Nordic scene to kind of not reinvent the wheel again. That's kind of what I've done.
Yeah, and I've been sifting through the ashes and kind of seeing what is left of this market and the people in it, and who is still passionate about what we're building here. It's it certainly has felt almost like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and beginning to just psychologically deal and reconcile with what was so ideological turned so materialistic commercial, and now we're almost back to start, and just traveling a lot, having lots of conversations, and building new tools for artists and curators.
Thanks for the update. It's always nice to hear what you guys are doing and what you guys have been up to. So yeah, thanks. So we can dive right into the topic, and I will start with an article I read today, and the title is Clicks versus Collectors by Zorazine. And the article explores the tension between digital art that is optimized for virality and art that is created with a focus on longevity and collectability. It suggests that NFTs can enable digital artists to prioritize the latter, as they provide a way to authenticate and sell unique, one-of-a-kind pieces. So I'm curious to hear from you. Is the rise of NFTs a sign that digital art is finally being taken seriously as a collectible asset, or are they simply the latest fad in a long line of internet trends?
I would say that digital art has always been taken seriously in terms of collecting, just not necessarily in a bigger group or on a bigger scene. I think the question is if this kind of huge audience will stay. I hope so, but it's always been taken seriously, I would say. What the change is that we maybe have reached a slightly new audience than what we had before.
I can see, Fanny, there's a thought. Go ahead.
I have no poker face. Oh my God. To go back to Colborn's saying about there was this hype of excitement, something new, something like I can make a living or get paid more easily for digital artists. But now it's like kind of speculators went out, like been a lot of changes in the market, like bear market, crypto winter, call it as you wish. It's a lot of things that worked 3 months ago don't work anymore, right? Like, I mean, this is really where the clicks that you mentioned, like clicks versus collectors, like the clicks are gone for like many artists, and we're still building this like network of collectors and this long-term viability of the space, and which we're not there yet, right? Like, I mean, this is kind of where we're talking about this morning with Alex from Right Click Save. It's a we all want to talk about the concepts, the artist, like the contextualizing like all of the works that are being produced by even more digital artists than before, but not many people read it, right? Because there's still kind of like this stuck between two chairs, where it's driven by collectors who are more of a clicker, like of just shopping like in a supermarket, and that's not what we're thriving for. I guess is the right term.
I don't have really much to add there. I think there is this inherent tension of the NFT artist as the marketing guru, and I think we had a lot of philosophers or people who had bought into ideas of cryptocurrency and were providing a visual language to ideas of, self-sovereignty, immutability, uncensorability, the idea that there should be more creative, diverse voices included in a contemporary art discussion, and that NFT was a kind of a distribution mechanism for those voices to be heard. And then somehow what was more of a collective became like a hyper-capitalist exercise, and the focus was shifted away from the movement of crypto art onto like the individual artist. And I think that is very much of a older narrative and a tradition of building markets around artists as brands and the artworks themselves becoming commercial products. And, I think what we were really toying with in the beginning is, what is the like commercial appeal of a product that can be right click saved and distributed when everybody can theoretically own it, but only one can own the token? And that was an interesting abstraction that I want to kind of like begin to return to. And I know that has nothing to do really with the question, but
I just have another comment as well, which actually doesn't really have anything to do with the question, but I was speaking to Jan Robert Lechte a year ago, more or less. And I mean, he has worked as a digital artist for a really, really long time with internet as the medium. And he was basically saying after getting into NFTs, he found that he had much more of a stable community. So I think that's what has changed for lots of them, is that community hasn't necessarily existed before, whereas when they moved into NFT, that community kind of grew around them and developed around them.
Yeah, I'm very interested now in like what in flushing out the difference between like a like on social media and what it means to actually own the object that has been created, and what does it mean to really like tap into this network of ownership at scale. Because I do think if more people own these things, then they are more closely attached to the artist, whereby they might like the artwork, but they may not want to own the token in that sense. So I want to begin to enable like people to own more of these objects and begin to draw that separation away from Web2 into like these ownership economies.
I think that's a good segue to the kind of different form of ownership, right? Like, I mean, this is kind of where like I don't think any of us is here to reproduce either the art market or the tech startup like market and just put it on the blockchain. I think there's part of the idealist like people who like think that can be different and better, and yes, it's not the easy solution, because putting back the art market on blockchain, or like just kind of taking the same and doing it again, like it's easier, but kind of having this new model and ownership ideas And right now you see this clash between these two crowds, the one who just want to replicate like existing markets just with the word like blockchain or Web3 in front of it, and the communities who want to make something different. And that really creates this like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde current situation between the market, the star system, like the influencers and the whatnot. And then like what I would call like small tribes, you know, like you kind of have this like redistribution or this what happened at the beginning when the movement, you know, like kind of started, you had like this like small like communities, and then now like it looks like we're maybe it's a, you know, safety mechanism also, like just going back to this like for like mental health, like these small tribes of like not looking for clicks but looking for like actual like connections. And you know, like MOCA's community is one, you have the cult of crypto art, you have like you know, many people have like different groups of artists or like JPEG space and but finding these pockets is where things are interesting. And you know, but it's not easy right now, and it's never been easy to like finance innovation or like, you know, make it like widely spread, but that's where things need to happen.
Right. Can I just go back to and make a comment on this like idea of ownership, which I think is super interesting, and that's not necessarily being considered when it comes to digital art, because in many cases it's just a file. Like ownership, any kind of ownership comes with responsibility and like of preservation and archiving, etc. And I think what tends to be forgotten when it comes to owning NFTs or any kind of digital art that is a file is that, yeah, but it's a file, it will last forever. And I think there are steps towards that now in terms of actually really considering how we're preserving and thinking about this for the future generations, even though that sounds very cliche. But we're still at a current situation where we're so, you know, in love with the blockchain and that everything that's on a blockchain is being preserved, where I think I know that's not true at all. And NFTs and all of that is so easy to buy when it comes to it. So you don't necessarily consider the fact that whatever you buy is actually comes with a responsibility. You just buy and you buy and you buy and you buy, and you don't think of the fact that you are also, as a collector, responsible for preserving the art that you have bought.
You know, that is a wonderful point. Just like me as a collector, I did not understand any, no art background, no nothing, just started to buy what I liked, right? And that was more than 3 years ago at this point. And I have been so hesitant to buy anything, to participate, because I don't even have an understanding or a grasp on what I had done previously, and beginning to like catalog it and sort it and make sure it's there, and like I appreciate it and recognize it and know everything that is there, and that everything kind of like has a place in what I was doing, and trying to understand that is critical. And it just speaks to this dynamic of being so enabled, so empowered, being able to act so quickly to spread value everywhere, to get these digital objects, but also kind of like an inherent responsibility to actually like care and appreciate and understand and contextualize and speak to everything that was done. We know how fast this technology is moving forward, but there are so few people going back to, you know, have these dialogues. As Fanny was saying in the conversation with Alex, there's like a couple people who actually care to do this work, but it's rare and it's difficult.
It's very ironic in a sense that like, you know, we all come to the conclusion that like it's almost too easy to click, and in a context where we're still looking for onboarding, right? Like onboarding more people, onboarding, it's always like, you know, the next million people into like blockchain, etc. But it's like you probably don't want to have more people to do that until you kind of find a better way to, especially on the art side, right? Like, I mean, this is kind of where just clicking around, and it's like, yeah, there's so much out there, and it's like, you know, you follow like artists and they're like, oh, an edition, you know, oh great, you're like great, like, oh, and this one and this one, and then you forget, as Stina said, that like there's like probably like 5 to 10 extra steps after you click to properly collect the work, right? Like to back it up, to you know, save the file, maybe write about it, or ask the artist for more details, like etc. etc. I mean, you can go on and on for that to be truly like something you collect, right? Not just something that you just, hoard stuff like in your wallet. And I have no conclusion.
I'm also like curious to know this. Do you think that artists who have a lot of rich crypto friends, like friends in crypto, have more of an advantage? Like connecting this back to collectors, right? Do they have more advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes, and that kind of comes down to the idea of collecting. Like if you know rich collectors as a painter or a sculptor as well, then you're more likely to maybe get bought. So maybe getting into the space, I would say yes, of course you have an advantage if you know people who owns the currency. I would say that's just kind of we like to support the people we know.
The fact that I have rich friends in crypto enables my work to be bought, right, a lot more, and it more and more expensive. But what if I have great work, but then I'm not really connected to a lot of wealthy collectors in crypto?
I mean, the answer is sadly yes, right?
Yeah.
I think we just see that low quality work is getting acquired for a lot of money because people know people and are, there is a false sense of transparency on the blockchain. I think to Stina's point, it's probably no different than the traditional contemporary art world. And in fact, I think people here have perhaps maybe just a better chance of their work getting seen, and people from probably obscure places or who don't have access to like gallerists or rich friends, the work at times does stand and it does get lifted up and out.
Yeah, I think it's a dichotomy between the market. So yes, in the market, knowing rich people is always a good idea. But that has nothing to do with the value or like the intrinsic, like there's many different types of value, historical, like not just like the money or dollar value of a work. And like this is no different from not to say names, but like a Damien Hirst, like sculpture. Yes, it's way more expensive than like most of the other artworks. Doesn't mean it's better. In my books, no, but agree to disagree.
I mean, it's kind of, we're back at the discussion in terms of how many artists have like started to make money after they sadly passed. It's kind of like we have so much of that in art history that they were not known or didn't own any money at all when it came to the art, when they were alive, and then they passed away and they got recognized for their work. And I mean, that is like you said, Colborn, that is very much according to what the contemporary or more traditional art world is like.
And can the platforms impact what we're talking about, in terms of like the ethical aspect in value creation?
I personally, as a collector, have never once taken collecting advice from anything that a marketplace has sent out. So, I think that's a bit of what do they call it? Like dog and pony show, it's everybody can like do the right thing, but that doesn't mean that, you're never going to listen to the salesperson. I listen to other artists, right? So if I do not know how to make 3D objects. I do not know what is technically accomplished in like digital arts, but I can take cues from other artists to form a signal of who is doing interesting, impressive work. So, you never take like car buying advice from the car salesman is kind of my motto.
I was going to say as well, I mean, it's, even though they're not necessarily representing artists to in the way that a more traditional gallery would do, like some in a way there's a little bit of a like gallery modeling. Like if a platform pushes an artist, like a gallery would represent an artist, of course it's more likely that they're going to be selling more than someone that they don't push forward or feature on the website. So yes, I mean, to a certain extent they can push and of course change the narrative in terms of if an artist know a rich person or not. But I would say it's also probably within their interest to push those artists that have a lot of collectors already or know a lot of rich people, because then it's more likely that those rich people are going to come and buy the pieces from their page.
there's been this misunderstanding of invitation only platforms that to me are like a supermarket, right? Like, I mean, this is where you go and you buy stuff. But then people, because it's hard to get on some of these, like super rare, some people have called these platforms curated platforms. And this is where it's not, right? Like, I mean, it's there's too many artists like on these platforms for even if they want to, like, they can't help or highlight or feature many artists, and they always kind of feature the same ones, right? Like, I mean, the ones that they know are already popular. So it's not where you're not gonna find the next new artist like following marketplace advice. But when you look at like small, like very small curated like galleries or marketplace, like that's, can call it like an online gallery, like it's again, it's reputational, right? Like, so that can also just be a salesperson with interest that you're like don't know about. So do your own research and figure out who the person you want to listen to is and what their affiliation. I think that's on the collector to do this research. And if it was easy, then it's not really a collecting effort, right? Like, I mean, then like just collect like what you see on these platforms or what someone else collects. And going back to Colborn's point, like in this case, following the taste and like the other artists and looking at like other artists, like early artist collection is really invaluable, because as any art movement, like, artists collect artists, and this is where you find the gems.
I think there's also an interesting point to be made here around the effort and the time that's being put in by collectors and people on these platforms to actually find the art pieces that they want to buy. Not to be negative, but I think quite a few of them, goes for quite standard. They're featured. Okay, great, I'm going to get that. They don't get much further than maybe the 5th page to be positive. But I think there's also a lot of people who buy and collect that just go for like the first look. They don't spend time researching. They don't spend time speaking to artists because they don't have the time, or because they don't have access to these artists, which is another point that is important to make. And they will buy what is being featured on the first page. That's what they will buy, because that's kind of the time and the interest and the access that they have.
Yeah, fair point. I mean, discoverability is a mess, absolute mess. How do you begin to define, how do you begin to like draw and connect these relationships? If you do not know, and if you have not tracked this from the beginning, then it's really hard to see in between the lines and the different webs or the different interests that parties have and maybe promoting or pushing something. And then it makes finding anything new and being an advocate really, really difficult, especially, when there might have been a couple hundred artists in the beginning. Now there maybe are tens of thousands, and everything just constantly gets pushed down. It is no longer an enjoyable experience to begin to like sift through and begin to identify individual stories. And maybe I just don't have the time for it anymore. But I think, there's an opportunity certainly for people to do this work and to begin to like continue to come in and be curators and flesh out these stories and look for new up and coming artists and begin to speak to why they're important and what's happening here.
I think that's not to shield MOCA. I have no financial interest in MOCA, but I think this, going back to that idea of tribe, it's like you kind of have to build people you trust or people you share taste with, and I just remember, like, it was a while ago, like, Colborn, when someone asked you like, how do you find new works, and you said, well, I look at what other people curate on MOCA, and so just looking at like other people you trust and if you like inspiration yourself, like, I think is great,
I mean, I appreciate that, right? So I was just looking through, we have almost 65,000 NFTs that have been activated into like the curation technology, right? Of which 9,100 have been added to our community collection, right? Every day that community collection is randomized and there's 100 pieces. So, when I want to be like reinvigorated, re-excited, or just looking for something to share on our page, give new artists a platform, I go there because you don't know anything about price. All you're given is just the piece and who added it. So, it's a great way to just begin to discover new artists and kind of find non-biased information that exists outside of a market context. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
But I think this is also like interesting that you mentioning the market context, because I think this is also a little bit where curation and curators, well, curators come in as well. Because I mean, from my own perspective, when I kind of work with artists and think about pieces to include in an exhibition or any kind of showcase, I don't necessarily think of it from a market perspective. I mean, the market perspective is so heavily, of course, associated with NFT. So it's actually really interesting that we kind of need to go back to that classical gallery model where you have to like ask for the price, like to actually think of it from a non-financial perspective, because we're so used to seeing like it was the backlash in terms of having to ask for prices. So the prices are always being shown, whereas now it's like we don't want to see the prices any longer because it's just too much.
Right.
Which is interesting.
And look, that we exist in this totally false idea of transparency, right? You never know what is happening. Just because a transaction happened doesn't mean there's a transaction on the back end, like undoing it. People play all sorts of games with the numbers and the work. And, I would just caution people that just because something says something doesn't make it real.
Yeah.
It's quite ironic, actually, like the level of opacity in ecosystems that was kind of based on transparency and public inclusivity, and I don't know, I see a lot of irony today.
I wanted to talk a bit about decentralized curation, but before I was thinking like, what is the difference between curation in the Web3 world and the traditional world? Is there like a significant difference?
I would imagine so. I would imagine just the sheer speed at which like digital objects and culture and artifacts and this idea of art can be created would present a probably 10x or 100x times challenge in just dealing with the amount of information and work that you're exposed to.
I have so much to say about that. But to summarize, I think one thing that haven't changed is that curators most of the time are not paid or are not kind of recognized on the even off or on chain, like in the transaction scheme of things. It's still very mainly artist and then collector, and that work is kind of still quite misunderstood and disregarded. But something that I've seen changed is when you talk about curation in the art world, it has, and I say art world more than art market, it has sort of a little bit of an aura around it, right? Like it's you work with the artist, you like work around the theme, like this is like something that like has education, preservation like attached to it, like it is kind of a noble, maybe it's my imagination, right? Like, but this aura. And then now if you're asked to curate an exhibition, what you're really being asked is to sell the shit out of it. Like the curation, like the other things, like, yeah, great, like, this is fine, like, but, and I don't know, maybe, it's probably similar, like, Stina, I would love to hear your point of view, but in a gallery, like traditional gallery, you kind of have more of a split of roles where like this seems to all be like lumped into like this like curation term.
I mean, think first and foremost is just like talking about an art market, like this is an art market where the wealth is like concentrated, extremely concentrated. And it's not like there's lots of galleries who are really struggling, like they do great work and they really trying to sell, but they're actually not selling. So I think that's also worth mentioning in the context of the market. And this, I think, to be completely honest, I come from a traditional art background, and for me, my curation and my approach of curation has not changed at all. I still think of it as I work with art, full stop. If that's digital or happen to be paintings or sculpture, it's still kind of the art that I work with, and it just happens to be different medium. that is, of course, a very personal perspective. That's how I see it and how I work with it. But I agree with you, Colborn. I think that the amount of white noise that you have to deal with is extreme, because there is the turnaround in the space is crazy. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. And I think that also kind of ties back to this idea of artists not being recognized, because I think it's also because of that white noise. A lot of really, really, really good work do get lost in that, because it's just like it ends up and like it's produced and then someone sees it and then like 10 seconds later, oh, there's a new piece. Like the attention span in terms of actually concentrating on really good work disappears for a lot of them. And that's maybe kind of where the role again of the curator comes into actually, I don't know if we have the possibility of sift through everything, but actually spend a little bit more time and attention on specific pieces that might stand out within this white noise.
It's hard, right? Because generally, like, what I've seen again and again is the simplest idea always wins, right? I think that's why PAC was able to sell like $70 million or $90 million of just like white cubes that you push together. The most viral ideas are the simplest ideas and the ones that people can just grasp in 2 seconds. And I think a lot of that, it just goes back to the earlier conversation. Like it's what is kind of almost like the most mindless clickbaity open edition, like everybody can just access like as quickly as possible. And I don't think, frankly, that makes for like very deep or interesting art.
This also ties back to like the super exhibition, like Da Vinci and all of that. It's like, it's nothing bad with that at all. It's brilliant that we get people in to see these exhibitions and really engage with it. But you have the idea of the super exhibition, which sells out. I think Da Vinci in London sold out. Like if you wanted to get like one of the spare tickets that they had on desk, you had to be there at 5 a.m. basically, because it sold out. So it kind of goes back to this, the idea of the super exhibition, the super drop, or whatever to call it in this context. But it's like it speaks to a wider kind of audience, an audience that feels comfortable with interacting with this because they know maybe a bit more about it and feel comfortable in the context of that, because it's more of a general audience there as well.
Well, and we live now in an experience and attention economy, right? So that is maybe that is the art now. The art of participation. Yeah,
I read something super interesting, that the art market now is actually like a part of the experience economy. That's what it is. It's an experience. Yeah. It's an experience economy.
Right. Frieze in and of itself, Art Basel, even that silly traveling Van Gogh immersive exhibition. Right. So much of it is about just the people in the pictures, and
it's fine until like if we have like still the other options, right? Like if that's the only thing that you have in the Instagrammable museums because nobody else go to the other ones, like having different types for different people, great. Like by all means, if you want to see Frida Kahlo immersive, like go for it, but let's make sure that the other ones don't appear because that just took over everything, right?
I'm curious to hear from you. Is decentralized curation a viable substitute for centralized content platforms, or does the model have inherent limitations that hinder its ability to promote high quality content effectively?
Look, everything we build at the museum is around decentralized curation. The hardest thing to find are people that actually care, right? And I think everybody talks about decentralization and I think the speculators outnumber the people who actually give a damn 1,000 to 1. And then it's just about time and desire to go back and pay attention to what you've collected and begin to provide context. It's, as Fanny said earlier, it's thankless, unrewarding work that generally gets under-recognized and underappreciated. But, we have 3,700 users, so there's, at least 3,700 people out there who care, and that's cool.
No, I think, and it goes back to, yes, I think recognition, like economic model for decentralized curation tools as well, so that like this is easier to do. But at the end of the day, like it's like making sure that like decentralization is needed, right? Like sometimes I do want to see an exhibition curated by Stina, you know, like, and I don't really care if she really, you know, we don't have to decentralize everything, right? Like it doesn't have to be like just for the sake of it. Like in some cases, like in MOCA or JPEG, like it makes sense, but it's like, I think we have to go back from this idealization of decentralization. You know, sometimes like a good, like old, like central power is good. Can't believe I say that, but it's true.
I'm going to back you up on this, Fanny. So I agree. I think decentralization is in theory a very, 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 very good thing. But I think in practice, it's usually a lot more complicated. And like you said, Colborn, as well, that you end up not getting too many people who actually cares about it. But I think also what we potentially have the risk of is undermining expertise and knowledge as well, which is something that the space is guilty of sometimes, that we're so set on this idea of decentralization and having every voice heard that we forget that you as a human can't possibly know everything and be an expert in everything. And I think that is at the same time as we're working towards decentralized ideas, protocols, tools, whatever, we also need to remember that there are, of course, expertise within subjects. There are people that know more about certain things, and that's just kind of natural. That's how humans works. Like, and that is also brilliant. That's also great. You know, that's where collaboration comes in, which we also need to think about. So I think yes, it sometimes work on paper, but in many cases it actually makes the situation more complicated. It underwrites expertise and knowledge, and I think we do still have, there are certain practices that's really good, like MOCA, of course, but there's also certain practices within the space that kind of showcases the fact that we still have quite a long way to go.
I would invite you to look at like any or like majority of DAOs and the activity or absence of activity and voting. I mean, inertia is a huge, and plutocracy is a huge issue in like anything like decentralized, like in terms of decentralized governance. I mean, this is something that, like, you know, still needs to be worked out, and it's hard to work out these things when there's like money involved already, like, and so many people. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, this is a bad thing that the space has like been under the spotlight, but for some things like that are not ready, like it really injured like some models.
It's interesting because there's also, like that you mentioned DAO, I think there's also certain DAOs just moved into more traditional model, like Fingerprint DAO, for example. They have a curation board because they realized that actually it was impossible to have all of their members having a say in terms of which pieces that was going into the collection. So what they had their members doing, I don't quote me on this, but I think what they did was that they had the members voting on who was supposed to be on the curation board, and that's where the members came in, and then the board decides what's going into the collection.
Yeah, Gitcoin actually have like as well, like this the Gitcoin DAO has like these ambassadors, because where you could delegate your voting power to people who are actually active within the DAO, and if you trust people like we, you know, are part of this council, it's like I delegated my votes to Simona Pope, who I know is heavily involved, like has time to like, or I don't know, actually, that would be a good question if these people like were like more involved than are paid by the DAO. It's a different question, but at least they're closer to the decisions being made, because if it's just number of people for number of people, but people have no idea and no expertise, as Stina said, then like value of the decisions is zero.
Like, I'll just say representative democracy seems to work much better than just like a pure democracy. Even in pure democracies, all you do is just see people lining up their vote generally with what has already been voted. So nobody has the ability to like take the time and understand every single issue. So, you know, they need it synthesized, and you know, that's where it helps to have like trusted signals.
And I think it's actually, just to finish on that, it's a great example of like, you know, like we were talking about not reproducing models and how hard it is to actually develop, you know, this is a new model, right? Like decentralized curation never existed before. And how hard it is, yes, technically, but also like when to use it, when to use a new model, like when to not use it. And I think it's sorry, I'm like making 180 degree, so 360 U-turn, but on other subjects it's the same thing, right? Like it's like on royalties, for example, like we've been back and forth, pros, cons, and people were like, maybe we should try another model, right? Like maybe royalties is not the right model. Maybe it's a tax, like a hybrid tax that the collector has to pay to retain the work, or it's a different type of model that I don't know, Dada and the invisible economy are working on. But it's when do you decide that an old model actually doesn't work and that you need to go and figure out something else? Like maybe it's not worth trying to dig a grave on some models.
But isn't it also about not having one model, but having several alternatives? I think that's kind of a key as well. That needs to be remembered, like when it comes to this kind of royalties or curation, decentralized, whatever, like there is the case of not setting up our systems to be like the one system to rule them all. I mean, that's surely not going to work. That's going to end up awfully. And I think that's kind of like, we shouldn't aim to create systems or that replace one system and that is the one system that we have. Like we should more aim to create alternatives if that has to do with curation or selling platforms or collecting or whatever.
And I'll just add the hardest lesson that I think I've learned in this is that most people are not capable of like exponential thinking or going from one model to something that is entirely new. It needs to be stepping stone. It needs to be little breadcrumbs. You have to lead people in a direction, and one piece of it might stick, but you don't just get to like invent a new model and say we're going from centralized to decentralized, like A to B. It never works.
Great points. These are important, very relevant stuff that we're discussing here. And I was just thinking about what Stina, you said, this idea of experts versus everybody wanting to have a voice, and how do we bridge that? Because that can be super chaotic and it affects productivity, it affects execution, it even affects teamwork sometimes. So I think that it is important that we can really collaborate. And I think collaboration means letting people who have the strength in certain things do certain things, and not have everyone try to do everything, because nothing will get done. And also this idea of, as we're talking about decentralization versus centralization, it got me thinking about an essay I read titled Towards Recentralization by Balaji. And it's pretty much talks about the choice between centralization and decentralization, and that they don't think either anarchic decentralization or totalitarian centralization is the solution. Instead, the essay suggests that recentralization with new leaders and innovation is not a step backward, but a step forward from a different perspective. But in a way, it makes some sense. But of course, there's more to the article, and I'd love to hear what you guys think.
I mean, we are currently living in the greatest re-centralizing event that has ever happened, especially around information, and that's AI, right? Mm-hmm. This is like everybody accessing the one hive mind that just feeds you the answer, or like Midjourney as the one creative tool to begin to interpret, text prompts. So people are aggregating all the information that has been created over like the 30 plus years of the internet's real like history, and they are creating centralized repositories of which we can access and inquire, but the output is the same. So I think I don't know, that's my thought.
It's hard to think out of the box, right? Because you're fed this news about AI and how it's great. Now you can rewrite everything with ChatGPT and create works. And of course you want to try it, and it's fun and it's exciting, but it's okay, well, pay attention, right? And to be honest, this is and it's fun. I just mentioned this new types of ownership, new types of, future of democracy. institutions, and there's the Radical Exchange like foundation. It's actually I mean, there's a few talks with Yuval Harari and Audrey Tang, with the Minister of Digital of Taiwan, and Vitalik Buterin, and about new types of ownership, like new like types of digital identity, like, and you know, we might not agree with everything that is like proposed, but I think this is like you know, kind of looking outside the box and thinking of new models is always very healthy, right? Like, just don't drink the Kool-Aid because you're being fed the Kool-Aid.
And I think this kind of ties in a lot with, like, I guess the roles that we are reconsidering within the art world or within the art context has to do with some kind of an institution as well. But even though it's kind of a rethinking that's going on for the moment, lots of them are still coming back to some kind of a core value that they've had within these institutions as well. And that, I think, has to do with like the knowledge and kind of the needs, and then also when there becomes an understanding for what these roles and institutions actually do when we are without them. The curator, for example, I mean, I don't know how many times I was called a gatekeeper before curator became like a hip thing to be. And then all of a sudden, you know, everyone needed a curator, because there was then an understanding that actually a curator is not necessarily a gatekeeper. Yes, of course we can be, but anyone can be a gatekeeper. But, you know, also the idea of the curator is actually to push artists forward and putting them in context that makes sense for their practices and for their careers. That's at least how I see curation as well. So I think it's kind of like a lot of it is being rethought and being questioned, but that also has to do with, of course, unhappiness, but also sometimes a misunderstanding for what these institutions and roles, etc., actually do, the work that they do. And when we end up without them, we realize, shit, actually, they were actually really good. And they, you know, they provided a lot of understanding. They provided a lot of context. They provided a lot of things that I didn't have to do the work. They did the work for me. And when they don't do that work, that means that I have to do the work. And in many cases, I'm actually not prepared to do that work. And that's when they come in again and become something that becomes reshaped, sometimes not even reshaped, but we realize that actually we do need them in a new form or in the old form.
Yeah, and I think this is the exact inflection point where we have a responsibility, you know, to like encourage this, like the needle move forward, not to move backward, to because some models, even the, you know, gallery model, where like you know, like, yes, there was work being done, but then like the 50% like fee, like maybe there's something that is better suited for new needs of artists, and or maybe it works for some artists, but kind of like being able to not just revert back to models after you're like, oh, never mind, I want like the, you know, freedom and I mean all the money, but I don't want to do any of the work. Yes, someone has to do the work, and someone will, you know, have to be paid to do the work.
Can I just make a little comment? It was actually a really funny comment I saw on Twitter like years ago, but it was during the time when it was like a huge discussion around curators and galleries, and, you know, not the need of it, etc., and the artists should be independent and, you know, get all the money themselves, etc. And I can't remember who it was now, but I wouldn't have mentioned the name anyway, actually, because I'm not going to call any person out. But it was one of the really big artists that kind of tweeted something along the lines of, oh shit, I really need someone to help me with the marketing, finding collectors, finding exhibitions to put my work in, doing X, Y, Z. And it was just one of those moments where I'm like, I know that you've been opposed galleries for a really long time, but that is pretty much spot on a gallery that you're asking for right now. And I just thought it was a little bit funny that it was just kind of like, I don't want this, they're like evil. And then actually when what they were looking for was exactly a gallery.
You know, the only thing I'll add is that like capitalism depends on economies of scale, which means that constantly we will see recentralizing forces. I have seen artists in this space who I swore would never, who spoke so many bad words, begin to like work with Sotheby's. And, you know, everything finds its medium, but in this world that we live in, I only see like asymmetrical information advantages leading to more centralization and structural rigidity of like institutions, economy, and government. And frankly, things have gotten, as we've seen, to the point where most of these institutions are too big to fail unless we are like ready to deal with a tremendous amount of anarchy and chaos. And, you know, Fanny's down in Argentina right now where there's 100% inflation, and like they are literally experiencing what happens when government fails, when economy fails, when inflation runs rampant. And I don't think the world is ready or prepared to like accept that.
No, and to, I mean, tie it back to a smaller use case of auction houses. I think this is where, you know, it's almost like we went back to an existing model, right? Like when the artists went back to say, okay, maybe like, you know, that would be great to have some help, like market my work, but they almost like forgot like the role, the original role and the core role of that traditional institution. Because when you look at it, it's like, it's not the role of an auction house to make a new artist like known and advertise the work. Like auction houses is like secondary market. They resell things that are already well known. You know, vintage Chanel bags, like very well-known contemporary artists, old masters. Like they've never been known to like discover emerging artists. And so at the end of the day, a lot of artists actually suffer from that because they don't sell, and these are too big to fail machines, where it's a very well-oiled like PR machine where you will never see like some news that like, yeah, these works did not sell, like, you know. And at one point I did an analysis of one of the NFT sale last year at an auction house with not name, and it was like I got so many backlash and emails being like, well, we're doing like a favor to the artist, like we're selling their work. And you're like, well, no, but like you're selling the works of like the biggest names that are already known, right? Like the PAG, the X copy, etc., etc. But then the smaller ones, they either sell at like very low amounts way under their market, or they don't sell. But like, of course, this is not part of like the news and the PR that is tied to it.
It's really interesting that you mentioned auction houses, because I find it a little bit funny that the space is so inherently like against galleries, which of course, like, you should always question the 50%. But I mean, if you're an artist, end up with a really good gallery that sets up your career. Like they can really support you and really push you in the right direction and allow you to grow your career in the right way. Whereas the space is very acceptant of auction houses, which is at the absolute center of the very traditional art market. I mean, they're like at the absolute core of it. And auction houses, for some reason, we are 100% okay with, whereas galleries, oh my God, no, we do not want to touch them or get close to them at all, because they are just pure evil.
Yeah, we had like a massive race to the bottom where everybody, all of these platforms decided that they wanted to be marketplaces, right? And because OpenSea raised it $13 billion, everybody raced to the bottom to sell as much as possible. And whereas Super Rare was, as Fanny was saying, like once a coveted gallery, right, that was representing these artists, they onboarded so many artists, they brought in so many different products that the word curation kind of lost all sense. So, you know, now we live in like a bifurcated infrastructure in this market where there's a ton of stuff on the bottom. There's like seemingly, you know, like Sotheby's or whatever kind of at the top, and there's really like nothing in the middle that is working individually with artists to like find them new collectors and help their careers. And that is why I think we see a lot of people like stepping away, because they don't feel help, they don't feel supported, they're exhausted, burnt out, they see marketing winning. It's something that needs to be addressed. The infrastructure that exists in the contemporary art world exists for a reason.
So maybe we have a business opportunity here, actually. Maybe it's time to set up a gallery, reconsidering the 50-50, but maybe that's what we should do.
No, but it's an interesting topic, because and you've seen artists well look for help, and so what they've found is a gallery. But most of the time they're actually training the gallery, like, because the gallery doesn't know like Web3 collectors and so on. So the business model is still the same, like the 50% like commission, but the artist is actually helping, you know, or like the power relationship is not the same anymore. Or you have people who've said like, fuck that shit, like I'm just gonna go to Hollywood and work with a talent agency. And of course the talent agencies are like, money, great. But then we have like the situation that happened with Claire Silver and the Louvre, right? And of course, like the blame was put on like the Paris Blockchain Week organizers who said like, you're going to be exhibited at the Louvre. Of course, it's not the Louvre, it's like the mall under the Louvre, right? But you're in the US, you're like, over there, like, it's like, you don't know, right? Like, it's like someone tells you you're going to be at the Louvre, great. But this is where, like, when you have an advisor, like, it's like, and the Hollywood, like, agency is like, great, love it, gonna write like this great article. And it's like, the fault is not just on the organizer. The red flag should have also come from like the talent agency. But when you spell Louvre with 2V, like you're pretty far away from like the reality of exhibiting at the Louvre. And I'm not saying that because I'm French. I sound very obnoxious saying that with a French accent. I realize that, but it's just saying that like they don't have the right expertise, right? Like they don't have the right like that, like anybody like in remotely involved in the art world would have said, wait a second, like, I mean, how are we going to get exhibited at the Louvre? Like, and so there's this real like gap, as you said, Stina, where it's like, okay, like, what is the new model? Like, what is like something that artists can afford, but that actually respond to their needs, which now are way more around like digital marketing, like and a lot of work ahead of time, and then the selling of the work, right? Like, which mostly commercial galleries like focus on.
Yeah, I'll say it makes me want to go build a place that I call the Louvre in the metaverse and then invite artists to show at the Louvre, right? Like that
But
was
please,
kind of
please spell it with 2 V's.
sure. That was always kind of like the fun and play with MOCA, is that artists could then go and say that they were showing at MOCA.
Did you see there's an artist called Felix,
Yeah.
and he built a tiny like little booth where he put like an iPhone in and so he goes to like art fairs. At first it went to art fairs with the booth and he said, look, you were exhibited at the Art Basel Miami, because he was there with the actual booth walking around like the aisles. And it's like, guerrilla marketing is amazing, like this is such a great idea.
That was a great idea. I got to meet him in Paris. It's so cool. So cool.
I want to talk a bit about social tokens. I want to know, do you think that like what are the biggest risks and like opportunities associated with this?
So many artists who had like a token, like Kevin the Bush or Sinacci, like
Hackatown, Xcopy.
Yeah.
Everybody. I mean, Roll onboarded all of the artists, and then there was the massive Roll hack, and then everybody got wrecked. And so tokens are hard. Again, it's just about care. Like when you have an abundance of digital things, it's just about care, and people don't care. They focus on what's hot in the moment. All like airdrops rise and then fall 90%, right? And then what happens then? Like people are left as bag holders with the ashes, trying to turn something out of nothing. And a lot of the time it just like takes too much work, and people aren't prepared to go on that multi-year journey to like establish and create actual value for the thing.
This doesn't necessarily tie in straight with social tokens, but it ties into the idea of like monetizing your work, which of course is something that you do quite naturally within the space. But I think there is also a slight problematic with that, is that the responsibility is basically taken away from the bigger platforms and from the bigger players, aka the companies, and being put on the individual, that basically you need to make sure that you make your own money, which I think I have a huge problem with, not putting some of that responsibility back on like the companies and such, because they are the ones who essentially have a lot of power when it comes to kind of the money making and the monetization of it, and kind of putting the responsibility on the individual, if that's the artist or the curator. I think that is a narrative for me that it's slightly wrong, and I think we need to have also consider the companies and put responsibility on them as well, in terms of actually paying the people that they work with.
You know,
if
when you were
that is,
taking
you know, sorry, Fanny, if that is like if that is curation still, I mean, that's content creation for them. If they have a curator using that platform, that's content curation for them, which kind of allows them to gain a bigger audience. I think there is like a balance that needs to be found there in terms of actually putting responsibility on the individual versus putting responsibility on the company.
No, I just wanted to make a comment because when you were speaking, Stina, I just had this thought that like we actually all have ADHD without realizing it and are trying to do like everything, you know, like artists are trying to create art, like have a token, like, you know, manage I don't know, a community, and I think we should just all like try to focus on use 3 things, like, and going back to our comment of like expertise, it's like, all right, like you can't have expertise in everything, like it's you can't. And Jason Bailey had a good post like that a few weeks back, I think, when he was sad to miss one conference, and then he said, well, maybe at one point I was in the known, but like right now I can't follow up everything, right? Like I just give up and I'm just gonna focus on one thing. And I think this is an advice that we could all take. I mean, I know, you know, I could take that, but overall, I think we have to stop trying to do everything ourselves and just chill the fuck out. Sorry.
Yeah, super good point, right? You always want to be in the know of the thing in the moments, right? So you were already rushing to try and be as contemporary can be. And so many times we just lose sight of like what is important and critical.
I think that's a good mic drop for the end.
We need a virtual mic drop. No, but these are really great points. And I think what really stood out for me, I mean, amongst other things, is not everyone is an expert, right? And I think that's kind of like one of the struggles that I've also observed. You know, it's very chaotic when everybody wants to have a voice, and also this idea of inclusivity, diversity, and what bridges that when it comes to curation, you know, because curation is sometimes I wonder, like, also is curation a form of inaccessibility in a way, you know, because yeah, so there's a lot to still like think about, but yeah.
And I think with the right tools, I think we can enable that, right? Like just reputation tools. Like, I mean, I think that's where we have an amazing opportunity to actually use this new technology to make the institutions and models better. But not everybody will take the time and the pain to make that happen.
Yeah, I think maybe it's not so much about flipping the concept of the institution onto something new, but, you know, actually taking some parts of it and develop it further and like apply our tools to it as well. I think you've both made points in terms of like we're not capable of thinking of completely new things as human beings, and it's like, why do we need to reinvent the wheel again when we actually have aspects of these institutions that works? Maybe we take those and kind of apply that to the new models and think about it from that way, that point of view instead.
Thank you so much. I guess we can, if you have any thoughts, maybe last thoughts that you want to share, you can do that. And then maybe you can also tell us where we can find you, and if there's any project you're working on and you'd like us to follow, a community to follow, you can mention that too. Anyone can go first.
Colborn, you're the only man.
That's
so
rude. Yeah, right. No, you go first, Fanny, please.
Well, it's gonna be fast. I'm not cool enough to have a pseudonym, so find me under Fanny Lakoubay anywhere. If you need advice, contact me.
Contact Fanny if you need advice. On Friday articles, you're still doing those?
So I switched, actually, that's a good point. Like I switched the newsletter from like a weekly reactive, like, you know, like short-term news to a monthly one, because I realized that, like, to me, that was also like allowing me to kind of be like, okay, like what happened, like what really did matter and what really did not matter. Like, you know, because when you look at the headlines over the past year, you're like, wow, there's a lot of like crap in there, and things that don't really matter. So yeah, monthly newsletter.
Not really any last thoughts. I think we've covered lots of great things. I think a lot of it has been said already. You find me on Twitter, which is Stina Linnea G. And I mean, yeah, I'm around curating as per usual in the space, but also thinking about the bridging between the old and the new. Like, how can we actually consider systems that we've had in new ways and not reinventing the wheel, because I think that's completely unnecessary.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, CO1BORN. I'd prefer you follow at Museum of Crypto. I tweet nonsense. The museum mostly tweets nonsense. I would encourage everybody to go dive into our wiki, check out what we're doing with curatorial tools, the archiving of work. We just finished Filecoin gave us a grant to anything that you upload to our community collection is backed up forever on Filecoin, and our rooms ecosystem as well. These are immutable pieces of architecture. The aggregate of all the rooms is the, I guess, digital embodiment of the museum. So that's how we begin to decentralize voice and bring in different works. And, you know, we have an extensive wiki that I would encourage people to go check out, read, learn about what we're doing.
Amazing. Thank
Come
you.
visit my room, actually.
Yes, go to Fanny's room.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much. This was really fun, really insightful, and it was just, it's kind of sparked even more, you know, conversations and potential collaborations and, you know, innovation. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching us, listening to us today. If you want to get more involved in our community, make sure to follow us on our social platforms, where we will have all the links in the description, as well as our amazing guest today. We'll have all the links in the description below. And don't forget to take a moment, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.